China and Portugal are located at opposite ends of the Eurasian continent. Yet, instead of being alienated by the distance, the two countries' relations have been flourishing for almost 4 decades. As we see a leap forward in Chinese investments in Portugal, we have also seen plenty of tangible benefits to the people in both countries. Learning the Chinese and Portuguese languages has become more popular in both countries. More made-in-China products are available to Portuguese people, and Portuguese wine and other specialty foods are ending up on the tables of Chinese households. Under the Belt and Road Initiative, Portugal has become the converging point for the new Silk Roads by land and by sea, making it an even more important natural partner for China. Looking ahead, how can the two countries tap into the potential of their relationship? Welcome to this special edition of The Point with me, Li Xin, a collaboration with the Portuguese television channel Porto Canal. I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by His Excellency Mr. Jose Augusto Duarte, Portuguese Ambassador to China. But before we start the discussion, let's take a review of 39 years of China-Portuguese relations.
Sino-Portuguese ties are in the best period of their history, as the Chinese ambassador to Portugal, Wu Jun, described it. Trade volume between the two reached $5.58 billion in 2017, and by the end of 2016, Portugal had invested a total of $199 million in China, while China's investment in Portugal exceeded $6.2 billion. The two countries established a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2005, and the relations are being reinforced by China's proposed Belt and Road Initiative. Portugal is willing to take advantage of its European ports and strengthen cooperation with China on the 21st century maritime Silk Road. China has also attached great importance to a bilateral blue partnership proposed by Portugal, which aims at deepening maritime cooperation between the two. The evolving Sino-Portuguese relationship could not only contribute to the cooperation between China and Europe, but could also foster ties between China and other Portuguese-speaking countries. As 2019 marks the 40th anniversary of the establishment of bilateral diplomatic ties, the development of a comprehensive strategic partnership is expected to be lifted to a new level.
Let's start the discussion. Welcome to the Ambassador. As we know, in 1979, China and Portugal established diplomatic relations, and in 2005, that relationship was elevated to a comprehensive strategic partnership. We know Macau came back from Portuguese rule to China in 1999. It was a success story, and it still is. So how would you evaluate the relationship between the two sides over the years?
The relationship between Portugal and China is excellent in all the fields. It's excellent at the level of institutional relations. It couldn't be better. I mean, it couldn't be better. The mutual understanding that we have between the leaders of the two countries. But it's also very good and increasingly good at economic levels and the cultural exchanges as well. I mean, as you mentioned before in the beginning of this interview, it is a fact that now we are studying more Chinese than ever in Portugal, and we are studying more Portuguese than ever in China. At least 32 different universities in China are teaching Portuguese language at the highest level that I ever seen in a foreign student. So in all the fields we have authentic, real good relations. Chinese have invested a lot in Portugal in recent years, and that has made a tremendous contribution also because it was done in a period where we most needed, because it was in a serious crisis in Portugal. These investments contributed for jobs in Portugal, development of the country, and the Portuguese people and the society are very grateful to this.
Well, as I mentioned, Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang was in Portugal in May, where he met the President of Portugal, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. And de Sousa, in his meeting with Wang, said Portugal is the European country that knows China the best. And Wang said China is willing to make bilateral economic relationship a showcase, an example for country-to-country relations. So what's different between Portugal and other European countries in terms of its relationship with China?
Well, in fact, I think we can say that proudly. We know China better maybe than some other countries.
How come?
Well, because, I mean, the first time that we established relations between China and Portugal, it was in 1509. And from 1509 till now, we never had a single conflict, never in our history. So it's more than 500 years of relationship without a single conflict. We are very distant geographically. We are very different in terms of religions, in terms of society. Yet, always, we knew how to overcome the difficulties that makes us apart, to put in first place the things that is in a common interest. Even Macau was never a colonial point. Macau, it's a tribute to the tolerant spirit of the emperors of China, to the Portuguese presence over there, and the determination of the Portuguese through dialogue, paying a tribute to the emperor of China and to the mandarins of Guangzhou, to remain there and to be the bridge and the point of contact with some other Western countries. So yes, we know, and we are present in this country for several centuries, never with conflict, and with a lot of inspiring stories in the past. That's why my president says such a thing, and we hope really that State Councilor and Minister Wang, we agree with him that we would like to be a showcase what we can be between the West and China.
Of course, one aspect of China-Portuguese relations is in the context of China-EU relations, right? And during a joint presser with his Portuguese counterpart, Wang Yi also talked about China-EU relations. Let's listen to this excerpt.
The first important consensus is that under the new international situation and historical background, both China and the EU will continue to see in each other opportunities for their own development rather than threats, make the other side a priority in respective foreign policies, and treat each other as important cooperative partners in strengthening mutually beneficial cooperation and achieving common development.
Ambassador, I would like to ask you, what do you think of the importance of China-Portuguese relations in the context of China-EU relations, especially when we're hearing different voices about what China has to do in order to be more friendly to European businesses, and doubts and suspicions about China's potential rise?
Well, we are not afraid of China's rise. If we know a bit about history, countries rise, countries go down, geopolitics and geoeconomics changes and transformations, it's part of life, it's part of history. So now sometimes it's China rising, some centuries ago it was other countries rising. That's okay, it's part of life, it's part of history, it's part of humankind. We live happily with that. It's not, we don't feel threatened by Chinese rise. It's good if this rise is done for positive and constructive good. And so, initiatives that build this growth together and bringing benefits for everybody around the world, it's a positive thing, it's a wonderful thing. And within the European Union, it's natural. We are 28 member states, we have a lot of debates, we debate a lot of things, different views. But one point is for sure, Portugal and the Portuguese government has always been very open to the global market and the liberalization, and we welcome definitely, not just in Portugal, but in Europe, not protectionism, but free trade and free investment.
Actually, exactly as you mentioned, investment from China has been growing exponentially. A lot of Portugal's privatization program is offering a lot of opportunity for Chinese investors. The latest news is China's state-owned utility, the Three Gorges Group, making a bid for the largest company in Portugal, EDP. So Portugal has been very open to Chinese investors. What's in it for Portugal that you want to welcome so many Chinese investment to buy up things in Portugal?
For all the reasons. It's quite difficult to explain that in a short way, in a very clear way. But for all the reasons. Chinese investments in Portugal never were financial operations. Quite a lot of potential foreign investors in Portugal. They like to do some just businesses just to destroy an enterprise and to enlarge a market and to have a market. With the Chinese investment, we are not just a market. We are a place where you develop a strategy, economic strategy, to develop an enterprise and to make it global. It's the case of ADP, and the investment from CTG in ADP, it's crucial. Unlike some other foreign investments and Western investors in there, their plan is a strategic and industrial plan to develop EDP, to develop EDP with headquarters in Lisbon, develop new jobs, create new jobs, and make it internationally competitive. So that's why we are happy, and they are always very institutional, and their relationship, it's not just a market thing, it's respectful towards the people, respectful towards the authorities. So really, we are not just, we don't feel that we are on the market to be sold. We feel that we are on the market to make a joint venture with these people.
Well,
so
however,
it's strategically completely different the way that they invest in that.
However, if you look at the numbers for bilateral trade, for instance, for 2017, bilateral trade stood at $5.6 billion, flat from the year before, and China's overall trade with the EU at the same time expanded considerably. What's the reason behind that? What can be done to boost trade?
Well, yeah, we have a lot of work to do that. We have a lot to do from the Chinese part, but a lot to do even more from the Portuguese side. We have to be more aggressive and more present in here. We are not a huge market, we are not a huge producer, but I mean, we have been present in quite a lot of different continents in the world. And Asia and China in particular, we haven't been very present in here. We have to be more aggressive. We have a lot of wonderful high-quality products that can be exported to China or can be invested in China. But we have invested in other places, and now we have to reinvest and reanalyze the market. So knowledge in Portugal about the conditions of the market is important, motivation, and not being afraid of the distance that makes us apart.
Speaking of the potential, I think the Belt and Road is one thing that can potentially offer even more a greater perspective. The Portuguese President, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, has said that Portugal firmly supports China's Belt and Road initiative. When meeting Wang, he said, with its finest ports in Europe, Portugal is willing to take this advantage and strengthen cooperation with China and further push forward the construction under the Belt and Road initiative. So what construction is going on, what has been planned, and what does the Belt and Road initiative mean for Portugal?
Well, the Belt and Road initiative is a positive initiative. I mean, it's, what we regret is that there isn't more initiatives around the world from other leaders that make this contribution for meeting people together and connecting people and bringing common development to everybody. Well, at least it's the way that my authorities see it, and it's the way that we welcome that in Portugal, and with that we like to be connected with that. We don't want to be alienated from Belt and Road Initiative.
How does Portugal see itself as a function in terms of the Belt and Road?
Well, we see it very well, because I mean, the ports of Portugal, it's the closest ports that we have from African continent and American continent. So the closest door to enter in Europe from the Panama Canal, it's Portugal. And so, I mean, the connection of Obor, the connection of Belt and Road Initiative, all, I mean, we are the extreme part of the Eurasian continent, and the other part is China. So being connected, it makes all the sense geographically and geoeconomically. So yes, I mean, we see ourselves connecting with the Belt and Road Initiative, and for a common good in a certain way, and connecting these ports of Africa and these ports of Latin America to Europe.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Duarte. I have to leave it there. My guest has been the Portuguese Ambassador to China, Jose Augusto Duarte. And you have been watching a special edition of The Point with me, Li Xin, on China-Portuguese relations. When we come back, we're going to talk more about economic and trade relations and cultural exchanges between the two sides. Stay with us. Portugal has rich culture and long history. The Portuguese language and culture have also profoundly influenced other parts of the world, such as in Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, among others. How much do the Chinese and the Portuguese people understand each other, and how can we know each other better and bring concrete benefits to each other? Welcome back to this special edition of The Point, coming to you from Beijing in collaboration with Porto Canal. I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Mr. Rui Moreira, are Mayor of the city of Porto, Portugal, Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, and Wu Jun, a talk show host with Xinhua News Agency who lived in Portugal. Welcome to all of you. Let me start with Mr. Mayor. A city on the rise, Porto is the second largest city of Portugal, also best known for its scenic river, the Douro, its medieval riverside district, which was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1992, and of course we all know the port wine. That's where it comes from. And every year I believe travelers from around the world go to that city. Increasingly, have there been more Chinese tourists to the city, and what are the numbers? Can you give us?
We are growing by something like 10 to 12% every year. We don't have a lot of tourists. We have something like 3 to 4 million tourists coming into the city, which doesn't seem much, but for a city of the size of Porto is already a huge increase. If you think 4 years ago we were known in Europe as the best kept secret in Europe, and now it's coming. We have had a lot of Chinese tourists coming to visit us, not only to visit the city, but also the Douro Valley, where they look for the port wine, for the gastronomy, for the food, for the experience, and for the heritage. We also have a lot of people who come from China to visit our university, and we have more and more university students coming from China to Portugal, which is something we applaud. Also the business which is going on between northern Portugal and China, which brings a lot of people. So when you look typically at Chinese tourists in Portugal, some are visiting their families because we have a very strong Chinese community in the north of Portugal. Some of them are visiting the university for business or for the university itself. Others are just coming to enjoy the history of the city. So that's something we see with a lot of potential.
What has this increased presence of Chinese, be it tourists or visitors or other senses or investors in business, meant for the city of Porto and for the northern part of Portugal?
Well, first of all, if you think that Portugal is coming out of a crisis, unfortunately the last years have been good, it helped us overcome the crisis. We have created a lot of employment through tourism. Tourism has enabled us to go back into basically full employment, which we didn't have. Another thing is, for some of the investors, especially the people who operate on the river, for instance, the ships on the river with hotels on the river, they see the Chinese tourists as very interesting because they are really looking for an experience they haven't had before. We want to show experience more than the traditional tourism attraction. We do not want to be a Disney World. We want to show a lively city. And that's something the Chinese tourists appreciate very much. The Chinese tourists are very special. They want to listen to the way we talk. They want to see how we live. They want to see how we enjoy life. And that's something which has meant a lot. And also, of course, it makes us very proud to have the Chinese visiting Portugal, because the ambassador of Portugal gave you an interview in which he explained these connections with, that we have. Everyone in Portugal is very proud that China has decided to invest in Portugal at a difficult time for us. So it is also, it has to do with our self-esteem, if you want, when we have the Chinese people visiting us.
Wow, that's really nice to hear. Victor, you have traveled all over the world. How do you evaluate the Chinese people's understanding of Portugal, of Portuguese-speaking culture and countries? Do we know that part of the world enough?
Well, from the Chinese perspective, we attach great importance to Portugal for several reasons. One is because Portugal itself is important. Secondly, this CPLP, that is the community of the Portuguese-speaking countries, is a very important concept. We want to engage with many of them. For example, countries like Brazil is a member of the BRIC framework, and is very actively involved with China in many, many respects. And recently, for example, we also have São Tomé and Príncipe, which recognized China as the sole representative of China and established diplomatic relations. And there have been efforts to grow Macau into a center of these Portuguese-speaking languages, countries and regions, for example, to become a hub for Portuguese language movie production in Macau. So I think we look at Portugal in different ways, and I would say, Portugal also left a very good influence on the modern Chinese history.
For instance?
The Jesuits, for example, and the missionaries who engaged with the Ming Dynasty court, as well as the Manchu court. And they brought in many European advanced knowledge and astronomy, for example, to China. And I think now that we have the benefit of hindsight, we can say that these Portuguese missionaries, Jesuits, etc., did contribute to our knowledge of the West, to China's knowledge about the world as it was, and I think it helped us to enrich the Chinese culture in the process.
In the future, what kind of potential strategic significance can China-Portuguese relationship have? Because we are talking, just now we talked about we being the opposite end of the Eurasian continent, but Portugal is such an important place where the 21st century Silk Road economic belt and the 21st century maritime Silk Road converge kind of in exactly that country. So in terms of the significance under the Belt and Road Initiative, where does Portugal stand?
Let me use one example which the Portuguese ambassador just now mentioned. Portugal has good port potentials facing the Atlantic Ocean, and right now there is a big push to import more natural gas in the form of LNG from the two sides of the Atlantic Ocean, from the United States, for example, Brazil, and many other countries on the two sides of the Atlantic Ocean. If, for example, a major LNG receiving terminal is to be built in Portugal, for example, Portugal can become a hub of transshipping LNG from the producing countries to many other parts in Europe. And I would say China will be interested, there are many Chinese companies which will be interested in becoming investors or promoters or pick up other roles in building up this kind of LNG terminal, receiving terminal facility in Portugal, which will not only work for the benefit of Portugal, but also serving many countries' interest in Europe.
Yeah, before I go to Wu Jun for your personal testimony on your life in Portugal and Macau, I just want to hear, Mr. Mayor, your feedback, your reaction to what Victor just said now about the potential of Portugal in terms of energy trade between China and the rest of the world. What do you think?
Well, coming from the shipping sector, which has been all my life before being a mayor, I recognize that we are strategically at the moment, especially with LNG, in a very good position. Also, we have the deep water ports in the Atlantic. And as the ambassador also stressed, and Victor also stressed, we are, if you want, at the crossroad, because we are near the entry of the Mediterranean, the crossroads to Africa and to the new Panama Canal. So strategically, we are placed in a fantastic position. The other advantage is that our, if you look at our coastline and the way our coastline is, it is possible to expand our ports, which are already deep water ports, into further ports. And when we look at what is happening with a lot of congested ports in Europe, if you look at Rotterdam, especially if you look at Algeciras or the Mediterranean basin ports, which are congested, we certainly have now the capacity to expand. So I think strategically we have a very good asset in the long term.
Okay, let's hear some personal story of Wu Jun. Why did you choose the Portuguese language, and why did you choose the city of Porto?
Yeah, actually lots of people have asked me the same question. Is that because you're crazy about Cristiano Ronaldo? Is that because you're a crazy football fan? So you want to learn Portuguese, you want to go to Portugal? Actually, I love Portugal because of its very diversified culture and very glorious history. I was lucky enough to make a trip to Macau during high school. I was amazed by the fact that Portuguese are ubiquitous. Portuguese is everywhere. It's on the billboards, on the road signs, it's on the newspapers, everywhere.
In Macau?
In Macau, yeah.
Sure.
But interestingly, the Macau people, local people, they don't speak any Portuguese. There are actually in total 9 countries in the regions in the world whose official language is Portuguese. Then I was just curious, and I was always wondering, how could a small country like Portugal have such power and ambition to conquer the whole world?
Did you find the answer when you were in Porto?
I learned a lot about Portugal's history, glorious history, especially during the time of age of discovery, where Vasco da Gama, you know, the famous Portuguese explorer. So I thought, this language is very interesting with its diversified culture and history. I was drawn to this culture.
Do you think Portugal is understood well enough by the Chinese people, or what is the biggest barrier to understanding?
I don't think so, because, well, talking about Portugal, most of the Chinese will say football. That's the only thing they can come up with in their mind. But actually, I think Portugal is more than football. We have great wine, like, for example, Porto is a great place for excellent wines, and we have great Portuguese literature. If you ask Chinese people, do you know Cervantes, a very famous Spanish writer? I think the majority of Chinese will say, yeah, we know.
Right.
But if I ask them about Fernando Pessoa, Camões, you know, the same influential, you know, Portuguese writers, I think Chinese will know, oh, really? No. And look at the restaurant. There are like Italian restaurants and Spanish restaurants, lots of them in Beijing. But how about Portuguese restaurants? I think in my mind, just the 4 or 5. So I think Chinese people, they don't know enough about Portugal, and I can see the gap, especially the cultural gap between China and Portugal, that we have to do something to figure it out.
Is there any plan to do something?
I think we are doing, you know, when we have people that come to Portugal and are enthusiastic about it. And I think basically we have lost a lot of time from our side. But we are a country of memories like the Chinese are. And for us, culture and economic development goes together, which is another thing that Chinese understand very well. When we look at this cooperation with China and the investment of China in Portugal, we do not see it as something which is pure tactics. We see that as strategic development, which goes back a number of centuries. And we really think we are on the brink of a new era of cooperation. Of course, Portugal being very small, my city has only 250,000 inhabitants. It's the second biggest city in Portugal. So compared to China, we are very small. So what we have to look is, we have to interest the Chinese to look at Portugal as a boutique, not as a big country. We can't compete size-wise.
Well, the Chinese love it. I think the Chinese
and I think that's
more
what
and
the
more.
Chinese want more and more, is this unique opportunity, unique speciality which we can provide.
Right. Victor, brainstorming.
Of course. I
little
think
bit here.
my personal idea is, if Portugal can set up a football training school in China, it will be very popular, and I think it will enhance the branding of Portugal in China. And also, I think China should work closely with Portugal to develop Chinese tourism in Portugal. And I've been to Portugal, and I really love it. And I've been to Macau many, many times. And I think there will be a chemistry for the Chinese tourists who will go to Portugal, spend time there, spend money, and eventually maybe decide to send their kids to be educated in Portugal. I think the potential is great, and hopefully many of my countrymen will go to Portugal.
Yeah. Wu Jun, how has your Portuguese experience influenced you? What have you gotten from that part of the world?
Well, I think the Portuguese language is not language itself. It also opens a whole new world for me, because, you know, there are 9 countries, nine Portuguese-speaking countries. So in Portugal, you can, you know, meet lots of people from Angola, from Mozambique, from Timor-Leste, from Brazil. All of these people, they have different social and cultural background, but we get together because we speak the same language. I think this diversity is something that Portuguese can give to me.
And I think that's something that China really upholds as well, right? To respect the diversity, tolerance. We're different, but we live together, and let's work together for our common benefits. So we have to leave it there. Unfortunately, time is so limited, but it's been a wonderful discussion. Many thanks to my 3 guests, Mr. Rui Moreira, Mayor of the city of Porto in Portugal, Victor Gao, Vice President at the Center for China and Globalization, and Wu Jun, a talk show host with Xinhua News Agency. And that is it for this special edition with me, Li Xin, coming to you from Beijing in collaboration with the Portuguese channel Porto Canal. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.